Medication storage and use. So we want to establish policies regarding the reporting, approving, storage, use, and documentation of medications within the recovery residence. We want to define what medications are permitted and prohibited at the recovery residence. And really, this is a complete list of prohibited medications, whether it's prescribed or OTC, what would you absolutely not allow? And then in circumstances where you would allow medications that aren't traditionally allowed in recovery residences, you would want to provide the SAR with some background on how exactly you guys are, or why you are going to accept those meds in certain extreme circumstances, and then how are you going to handle those medications. And what we're talking about obviously is narcotic medications, easily abused medications, where maybe a resident was severely hurt, and it's going to be a short-term use of those medications. We want to establish procedures for communicating with healthcare professionals regarding the residents' medications needs. A policy and procedure for alternative staff emergency access to medications when staffing varies from scheduled access. This is only in the case of if medications are staff held. Obviously, if residents are holding on to their medications, there doesn't need to be a separate staff person that has access to them. But if medications are going to be held by staff, there needs to be more than one staff person that has access to them in case of emergency. Again, when it comes to being staff held, we need to see the observation policy and procedure and documentation of such. Obviously, medications would need to be self-administered, and staff would just observe them unless you have qualified staff that can administer medications. And you want to make sure that if you are a program that is holding on to resident medications and doing an observation protocol, that you have documentation on both med logs, inventory logs, etc. What is your policy and procedure regarding noncompliance of medications? And that's both in abuse of medications as well as not taking prescribed medications for our psych meds. Moving on to drug testing. We want to obviously ensure that our homes are alcohol and drug-free living environments, and that is the purpose for drug testing in our homes. It's not a medical necessity in a recovery residence. It is to ensure a drug and alcohol-free living environment. We want to make sure that we are specifying the types of drug testing and alcohol testing that we are doing, and the minimum maximum frequency of drug and alcohol testing. We also want to make sure that if we ever use an outside or an internal lab, that we outline the process for utilizing confirmation toxicology screenings and documenting the results. We also, when we get into the resident handbook, need to make sure that we are informing residents of any potential costs that are associated with drug testing. So if drug point of care cups are included in the cost of the program, however, if they have an overnight pass and they're responsible for a $10 fee, they need to be made aware of that. If they want to dispute a test result and it's at their cost using the lab that you define, and the maximum charge is whatever, $120, you need to make sure that they're made aware of that. The same goes for confirmation testing. Even if it's the resident's insurance that is going to be billed, they need to be made aware of that it's going to cost maximum $1,500 for a full spectrum confirmation if it is sent to a lab. So they just need to be made aware of the potential cost to them with any type of testing. If there is no cost, then you're just going to simply put there are no costs associated with any types or any forms of drug or alcohol testing. Oh, and that's what we just covered. We want to make sure that we include whether this is observed by staff, any drug alcohol testing. And then we want to make sure that we're documenting the results of every single drug and alcohol test that we performed, and who performed that test, whether it's positive or negative. We want to make sure that all of it is documented. That way, when FSAR comes out and does your on-site assessments, they can see how often you test residents and that you are actually testing residents to ensure that drug and alcohol-free environment. Now, when it comes to reoccurrence of use or relapse, we want to make sure that we include the procedures for resuming sustainable recovery plans and preventing ongoing substance use. So that's medical clearance, referrals, or higher level of care. If someone has had a reoccurrence of use in a recovery residence, doing nothing but intensifying program or putting them on curfew is going to be considered non-compliance. They do need to get at least medical clearance, and separation from the community. So that could be while they're going to get medical clearance, that would be the separation, or referring them out to a more appropriate program or a respite, or a safe haven while they wait to produce a clean urine, or bumping them up to a higher level of care. Now, that could be in your own program. However, just letting them allow in the recovery residence without doing any of those steps would be seen as not compliant with the SARS protocols. Let's talk about notification. We need to notify any care professionals the recovery or the resident is working with and their emergency contact. If it does lead up to an actual discharge, we want to outline the conditions for readmission or return after the relapse and procedures for addressing the event with the community, documenting the resident's vacancy, and the residents and linkage to the appropriate service provider. So we want to make sure that we're documenting what exactly we did with this resident, or did the resident refuse our help? Where did they say they were going? We handed them a community resource guide and notified next of kin or their emergency contact, not next of kin, I'm sorry. Discharge. Policies and procedures need to be in place for addressing discharge assistance. And that is whether it's successful completion or an emergent event, prematurely leaving the home, or having a relapse, or if it's a major rule violation. So what does the policy and procedure for successful completion look like? Transitioning out of the home to a less restrictive level of care, or back to their permanent dwelling, or to a new home. And then, do we have an alumni program, and how do we introduce them to that? Now, first year providers, we don't expect you to have a fully blossomed alumni program. However, during your second year of certification, we are going to be looking more at your alumni program and what you are doing in regards to that. We also don't expect for you to have a large alumni program where you have a monthly barbecue every month for everyone to come back, and a huge financial burden for you all. It could be a simple a Facebook group, a phone tree. They come back to speak at the recovery residence during house meetings. Some type of way we're bringing them back and connecting them to our current residents. Administrative involuntary discharges. What do those look like? So these would be for consequences of major rule violations. And so are we going to be linking them to another home? I guess it depends on the scenario, whether they're going to a higher level of care, more appropriate level of care. But if we are going to be doing an involuntary discharge, we do need to notify their emergency contact and any care professionals that they are working with. And then again, staff advice or ASA, AMA, abandonment depends on what level of provider you are, on what you're calling it, but it's really all the same. Are we going to link them to the community? Do we provide them a ride? If they just completely took off, we're going to need to notify emergency contacts. Are there going to be forfeitures of fees involved with that type of discharge? And then in any of these scenarios, what are we doing with the resident belongings if they're left behind? And keep in mind, we do need to hold on to resident belongings for at minimum 10 days. I know a lot of you have policies and procedures that say you hold on to them for 10 days, but you actually still have the things in your basements and garages years later. That's fine, but we do need to make sure we're holding on to them for at minimum 10 days. And then what are we doing with medications if they left them behind? Your grievance policy and procedure. So we want to make sure that we're establishing transparent process for residents to submit written grievances to ensure timely resolution, and that the residents are orientated to those policies and procedures at intake. So it very clearly says written there for a reason. It can start off as a verbal communication with a house manager or a staff person, but once it gets to a point, it does need to be documented and in written form. That way, if they do escalate it, there is a paper trail to follow, and just reassures that you all will stay in compliance. I, during my capacity of executive director at FAR, I always told my providers, document everything. The more documentation, the better. If you had that verbal conversation with the resident, reiterate it in a text message. That way it's documented and everybody is on the same page. If you didn't have the opportunity to do like a behavioral contract or something, always make sure it's documented. Just makes it really easy to stay in compliance. Make certain that in your policy and procedure that there are multiple internal contacts for reporting the grievance. So if they have if they're disgruntled with the house manager, then they can take it to the resident manager. If it's with the owner, they can take it to the CEO, however that looks like in your organization. 2 internal points before escalating it up to FSAR. And then you want to make sure that your policy and procedure states that that policy is going to be posted in conspicuous locations within each of your homes, and also available on your website if you have one. If you don't have a website, obviously you do not need to post it. And then you want to make sure you do post them in your homes and on your website. And you want to make sure that the last step in there is that they still feel like their grievance is unresolved after going through all the channels within your organization, that they can escalate that matter up to FSAR, and you want to provide them with FSAR's contact information, including phone and web. Life skills development. Now, this only applies to R3s and R4s. But we want to make sure that we're offering routine life skills development classes and services to help residents grow and develop. So you're going to want to provide an outline and supporting documentation used in formal settings. So these are formal classes, if you will, that we're offering. It's not just, John comes up and needs help with a resume and I sit down with him and do that. These are going to be in your schedule and formally offered to all the residents within the home. You want to provide any contracts or agreements with outside providers, counselors and vocational consultants if you're bringing them from outside in-house to FSAR. And you want to make sure that you're providing any documentation that regularly assesses residents for their development. You can establish connections with external resources to provide additional support for residents' life skills development. Just make sure that as you're documenting your process and your policy regarding life skills development, that you're documenting that in the outline that you're going to provide to FSAR for their review. Maintenance and repair. So we want to assure that we have sufficient staff and maintenance personnel to address the property's upkeep and repairs. establish procedures for residents to report, again, written maintenance issues for prompt resolution. And we want to make sure they're written again so that it ensures your ongoing compliance. Residents can't say that they continuously told you to fix the door or whatever it was, and you guys just never listened to them, and they told you and told you and told you, and these guys are scumlords. Make sure it's a written process, and that can be text, it's just documented. And then you want to make sure that you're conducting regular safety inspections to maintain that safe living environment for residents. And there is a checklist that FASAR has with what NAR would be looking for, and maintaining either your environmental care scans, or we call them self-safety inspections. And we expect you guys to be doing that at least once a month, but if you want to do it more frequently, you're welcome to. But you do want to keep logs of those. And then also document your procedure for how long do maintenance issues take to resolve. And I know that we can't definitively say that in every circumstance, but you can give a range of when residents can expect for maintenance issues to be resolved. Okay, so we're gonna dive into staffing documents in just a moment. All right, so this is going to be all of your policies and procedures for conducting background screenings, verifying staff certification, your staff development plans, peer leadership policies, job descriptions for every position that's held in your organization, how you conduct staff evaluations, and a sample staffing schedule. So we'll start with your employee volunteer background screening policy and procedure. So you need to have a policy and procedure for conducting appropriate background screenings, with at minimum just doing a due diligence practice on all staff and volunteers in accordance with state law. And Delaware does not require more intrusive laws like Florida does as far as like level 2 background checks. Now, if that's something that you do, you just put that in the policy and procedure, but we're expecting you to do at least due diligence on everyone that oversees or has any type of management role over residents. You want to provide FASAR with any forms used in that process of conducting background screenings, and you want to maintain the documentation of all screenings in the employee records. In your policy and procedure, you want to list out any disqualifying offenses that would exclude someone from employment opportunities or oversight of residents and clients. And then a procedure for the removal and notification to FASAR in the event that a staff member is arrested while they are employed with your facility. Staff drug testing policy and procedure. So we want to ensure staff's compliance through comprehensive drug testing policies and procedure, clearly outlining what exactly the procedure is for conducting staff drug testing, how often we test staff, and where we maintain the results of such testing. And then how do we address positive results should a staff member test positive. So we want to consider the level of support, and we want to adjust those procedures to align with the level of support that you all provide. We want to make sure that we're looking at what type of staff we're dealing with. Is it bona fide staff that we're testing, or is it peer staff that we're testing? So peer staff is obviously already being drug tested at the residence, where bona fide staff would typically go to an outside facility to be tested. And then we want to tailor the drug testing policy to meet the specific needs of our population and staffing model. Staff certification and verification policy and procedure. This only applies to levels 3 and 4. So we want to have a procedure to verify certification of staff requiring state or local certifications. And so if the position requires that the staff is a certified recovery support specialist, how are you all going about verifying that and documenting that you're verifying it? A policy and procedure for employing certified staff appropriate to the population that you serve. So what type of clients are we dealing with, and what type of staff do we need in order to treat those clients? And then procedure for implementing and recording references and verification policies for employment. Staff development plan. This is now required at levels 2, 3, and 4. It used to only be required at levels 3 and 4. So this is going to be new for you level 2 providers. So a procedure for ensuring all applicable staff completes mandatory certification trainings. Policy and procedure outlining the steps, timeframes, and documentation to support provider required trainings. Developing a plan detailing the necessary skills and resources needed to support each position, and a policy for providing opportunities for staff and peer support, performance improvement, including training opportunity and skills development. And so for your staff development policies and procedures, this is something that you guys are going to look at on an annual basis. Obviously, you don't want the same staff going through the same trainings all the time. It's about developing and improving their skills and enhancing their skills. So your policy and procedure could be generalized and how you guys assess for those things and look for opportunities for training development and the frequency that you do that. And then a more defined policy and procedure would come out every year with the specific trainings outlined for each position. Staff wellness policy and procedure. This is brand new with the NAR 3.0 standards and making sure that our staff is maintaining wellness and self-care. So we want to see your policy and procedure of how you guys are facilitating that and making sure that your staff is maintaining wellness and self-care. So we want to make sure in the policy and procedure, we're encouraging staff to prioritize their own well-being through self-care practices. We ensure staff understand and adhere to our internal code of conduct. We emphasize genuineness, empathy, respect, and support and positive regard as values to be exhibited by our staff. And we promote the importance of building a network of support within and outside the workplace. And so burnout is real. Burnout is real, y'all. And we want to make sure that individuals, especially individuals in recovery, are not making our programs their program of recovery, and that they are looking at external sources and working and maintaining their own personal recovery outside, and that they're given time to do that. If we're working them 24/7 and they never have downtime, then they're not going to have the opportunity to do that. Peer leadership. So we want to involve peers in leadership. So we want to have a policy and procedure describing the system through which peers are involved with the recovery residents' leadership in positive ways. And this is going to vary from level to level. Whereas in level 2s, we're going to involve peers a lot more than we are going to involve them in like a level 4, but we still need to involve them nonetheless. Corresponding documents describing how individuals may ascend in leadership status within the recovery residence. What do they need to be doing to start getting promoted and getting more accountability and more responsibilities as they progress through their journey of recovery? And then a description of those responsibilities. What is the peer leader going to be doing? How and what manner are they engaged within the recovery residence? And then staffing job descriptions. So you want to make sure that job descriptions for each position held must be provided to FSAR staff. And so when FSAR is going through your policy and procedure manuals and your resident handbooks, they're going to be looking to see what positions are listed and referenced throughout that manual. And they're going to come back and say, we haven't gotten a job description for this position, this position, this position. And you may come back and say, we don't have those positions. You want to make sure that your policy and procedure manual only lists out positions that you guys actually maintain within your recovery residence or your organization, and that you're providing those corresponding job descriptions. We want to make sure the job description outlines duties and responsibilities and specific time necessary for each position, that it includes performance support. So who is the supervisor for each one of those roles? Outlines the skills, education, licensing, and certification requirements for each position, and includes, oh, that's a duplicate, right? Includes all of those positions again that are listed in your policy and procedure manual. We want to make sure we have job descriptions for them. Staff evaluation policy and procedure. So we make sure that we're providing the procedure for evaluating all staff employees' performance, including the frequency of those evaluations and any employment probationary periods. And this may vary from position to position. So if that's the case and there's different evaluations for each position, then please be sure to include whatever forms are relevant from position to position. Procedure for resolving any grievances or complaints referring to staff, including expectations for those resolutions and documentation. Procedure needs to include peer-to-peer, staff-to-staff, and self-administered evaluations referred to in formal evaluations, and include any forms used in that evaluation process. And then those need to be maintained in the personnel files that PASAR will verify during their on-site assessments. Staff code of conduct needs to include your harassment and discrimination policies, use of company resources, establish clear dress code guidelines, workplace behaviors, conflict of interest policies and procedures, and highlights your key values. Now, your sample staffing schedule is a sample, but it should outline a typical week within your recovery residence, and it should only list out awake staff. And so if you have a live-in house manager, you're not going to want to put that John is available 24/7 because he's not. He's sleeping. There's some downtime for him. And so this is just a typical schedule for like a 3 or a 4 really, where it outlines the different time frames and dates and who's generally on site at that time. And you can also put in there if you are a 3 or a 4, and we'll be looking for that, when our clinical group hours, although they'll be off-site, we want to see that blend in our 4s, and also when is our weekly house meeting? Is there a deep clean day? You can address all that on the sample schedule. Resident orientation handbook. So your handbook is your guide for new residents entering the recovery residence or residents that have been with us before that are returning. This is all of the policies and consents. So when we do ask for this laundry list of documentation, you're going to see some similarities where we're looking for in your policy and procedure, what is the drug testing policy and procedure? But in your handbook, we want to see what is the drug testing policy and consent. We are not looking for the exact same document. The policy and procedure manual is staff directed, and your resident handbook is resident directed and need to know information for them to consent to. But they don't need to know all the mechanics behind the procedure necessarily. And then again, please note, they will need to consent individually to each one of these items, and not a general acknowledgement at the end. That can be done electronically or manually. So the first is our resident application. This is going to collect all the pertinent personnel demographic information for a prospective resident. So their contact information, their emergency contact, a list of medications that are prescribed, their dosage and frequency, any medical issues they're dealing with, criminal history, including specifically their sex offender / predator status, probation, parole, fleeing history, sex offender right there, substance use history, detox treatment, recovery housing history, their recovery path, their drug or drugs of choice, current employment status, and any educational background. Oh, and income sources. I don't know if you guys can see that. Did it moved on? Oh no, it didn't. Confidentiality policy and consent. Residents are responsible for honoring the privacy and confidentiality of fellow residents. Release of information forms are required to communicate with outside care providers. So we want to make sure that it includes your policy on confidentiality. It includes the peer-to-peer anonymity policy that residents need to respect, the social media policy and release. If you guys do have video and audio surveillance, we want to have a release on that, a sample release of information, and the procedure for redacting consents. Staff management contact sheet, pretty simple. This is just going to list all staff members and their contact information for residents to easily reach out when needed. So this should not just be one individual. This needs to be anybody that is important that the resident needs to reach out to. So if it's their case manager, how do they get in contact with them? Who do they provide rent payments to? Who would they need to file a grievance with? So any of those internal points of contact within your organizations that makes it run, they need to have the appropriate contact information for them. And this information also needs to be posted within each one of your residences and kept up to date.